They are breaking down in private, and most people would never notice it. That is the hardest part. They were never supposed to let it show. In front of others, they still look calm, they still answer normally, they still carry themselves like nothing inside them has changed. Your name can still leave their lips as if it means nothing, as if it is just another sound in a normal conversation. But the moment they are alone, something in them starts to crack. Not in a loud way, not in a way that anyone can point at and name. It happens in silence. It happens under the surface, like pressure slowly building behind glass until one day the glass cannot hold anymore. It is not dramatic. It is not obvious. It is more like a quiet split running through the inside before anything fully falls apart. And you need to understand this part. You did not leave them in a normal way. You did not become a simple ending they could accept and move past. You became someone they cannot fully have and cannot fully release. That kind of unfinished bond shakes people more than a clean goodbye ever could, because the mind hates what it cannot place in a clear box. It keeps returning to what makes no complete sense. It keeps circling what never truly ended. And if you have ever wondered why someone can look perfectly fine in public while collapsing in private, stay with this, because the answer is deeper than missing a person. It is about losing control over something that still feels emotionally alive. That is why the surface lies while the silence tells the truth. They do not cry because they miss you in a simple way. If it were that simple, healing would come faster. It would hurt, yes, but the pain would make sense. This is different. This is heavier. They cry because you now live in a place their control cannot reach. You are not fully gone, but you are not fully there either. And that middle space is brutal. It wears them down slowly. The deeper mind does not know what to do with almost. It does not know how to close a door that was never fully shut, so it keeps going back. It replays the same moments. It changes the meaning. It questions the details. It studies what happened from every angle, hoping one more thought might finally bring peace. But peace does not come. Instead, the loop keeps running. That is the real trap. People often think rejection is the worst pain, but sometimes almost having something hurts more. Rejection gives the heart a line, a stop, a final answer, but this kind of connection gives no clear ending. It gives small pieces, a few moments, a few signs, a few glimpses of something that felt close enough to believe in, yet never solid enough to hold. That is what keeps them restless. That is what keeps the story alive in their head long after the moment has passed. And here is the part many people never say out loud. A half-finished emotional story can become stronger in memory than a fully lived one. Listen carefully, because this is where the unseen pain begins. It is not always the loss that destroys people. Sometimes it is the possibility that never reached its full shape. At night, when the noise fades and the day can no longer protect them, the mind starts opening doors they tried to keep shut. That is when your memory returns with force, not because they invited it, but because silence removes the distractions that helped them survive the day. Suddenly the questions come back. Why did it feel so real? Why was being with you so easy? Why does someone they are trying to forget keep showing up in thought without permission? They go through old messages again, not to feel better, but to study them. They read old lines like there is a hidden answer buried between the words. They look at the way you said things, the way you paused, the timing, the tone, even the silence between sentences starts to matter. They replay your voice in their head. They remember the rhythm of the conversations, the emotional weight of moments that looked small from the outside but felt huge on the inside. And what they would never admit is this: they are not only remembering you, they are trying to rebuild a version of reality where it all turned out differently, a version where the timing worked, a version where the feelings were allowed to grow, a version where you became fully theirs instead of almost theirs, but they cannot finish that picture. Reality keeps breaking it apart, so the mind turns that broken picture into contradiction. They tell themselves it meant little, yet they still revisit it. They say they are over it, yet they still react to echoes of you. And if that sounds confusing, it is because unresolved feelings always speak two languages at once. One language is logic, the other is emotion, and emotion is usually louder when the room gets quiet. On the outside, they seem fine, maybe even better than fine. They work, they laugh, they talk, they make plans, they show up. They move through normal life with enough control to convince almost everyone that the chapter is closed. But inside, a different process is still happening. Someone new gets close, and they freeze for a second without understanding why. A word reminds them of you, and their body shifts before their mind can hide it. They insist your name no longer affects them, but then something small happens, a tone, a glance, a song, a silence, and all at once the calm slips. This is how internal conflict works when a person has forced closure only at the surface level. Consciously, they made the decision to move on. Subconsciously, nothing accepted that order. So now they live split in two. One part of them keeps going, one part stays behind, one part builds a future, one part keeps standing in the same emotional room staring at what was never fully finished. And that split is exhausting. It is hard to explain. It is even harder to admit, because from the outside there is no clear reason for the pain to still be there. Life has continued, time has moved, the world has not stopped, yet inside them something remains suspended. This is why they can feel strange even during good moments. This is why joy can suddenly turn thin. This is why peace does not last as long as it should. And if you are still listening, this matters. People do not always suffer because something dramatic happened. Sometimes they suffer because something meaningful was left without a real ending, and the mind keeps trying to write one long after the moment is gone. The deeper truth is not only that they miss you, it is that they miss who they were when they were close to you. That is what makes this pain so difficult to replace. Something in them opened during that time. Maybe they felt seen in a rare way. Maybe they felt understood without having to explain every part of themselves. Maybe for once they did not have to perform, protect, edit, or shape who they were just to feel accepted. Maybe they simply existed, and that felt new. That felt safe, that felt alive. So when the connection changed or slipped away, they did not only lose a person, they lost a version of themselves that had started to breathe more freely. And that kind of loss is hard to name. It is not just heartbreak, it is identity pain. It is the grief of no longer being able to reach the self that came alive in the presence of someone else. That is why they keep trying to understand it. That is why the feeling lingers even when they want it gone. Because what they are grieving is not only your absence, they are grieving a state of being, a version of life, a version of their own heart. This is also why new people do not solve it right away. New faces can bring attention, interest, distraction, even comfort, but they cannot easily recreate the exact emotional opening that happened before. And that difference becomes impossible to ignore, even if they try. So before you think this is only about romance, look deeper. It is about recognition. It is about emotional permission. It is about what happens when someone helps you feel more like yourself, and then that feeling is no longer there in the same way. That is why they try to rebuild it through other people. They talk to someone new, they start fresh conversations. They say yes to new experiences. They tell themselves this is healthy, this is progress, this is growth, and maybe part of that is true. But even while they are moving forward, something still does not fully connect. It is not always because the new people are wrong for them. It is often because the emotional mark left behind by you does not match what they are finding now. So comparison starts without permission. A laugh sounds different. A conversation feels flatter. A silence feels empty instead of full. A connection looks right on paper, but lands differently in the heart. And they hate that they notice this. They feel guilty for it. They wish they could stop measuring new moments against old emotional depth. But the mind compares what touched it deeply. That is what it does. And the more they notice these differences, the more unsettled they become. Because admitting those differences would mean admitting that what happened with you was not small. It was not casual. It was not easy to replace. So instead of facing that truth, they bury it. They stay busy. They fill the day with noise. They keep moving. They scroll, work, talk, go out, come back, repeat. Anything to avoid that quiet point where the truth rises again. And this is the part most people miss. Distraction can delay emotion, but it cannot erase it. It can cover the wound, but it cannot close it. So what is pushed down during the day returns later, usually when the lights are low, the room is still, and there is nowhere left to run from what the heart already knows. Over time, the feeling comes back in forms they do not even recognize at first. It returns as heaviness with no clear reason. It returns as distance from people who have done nothing wrong. It returns as a strange emptiness in moments that should feel warm. It returns as irritation, numbness, overthinking, or quiet sadness that arrives without warning. And because there is no obvious event happening in that moment, they tell themselves it must be stress, tiredness, routine, or something else they can explain away. But deep down, the source is older. It is the emotional imprint that never fully left, especially at night, when everything slows and the mind is left alone with itself. The buried parts come back to the surface, not as neat thoughts, not as logical sentences, as feeling, as memory, as atmosphere. They imagine conversations that never happened. They replay endings that could have gone another way. They create alternate scenes where you stayed, where the timing worked, where misunderstanding disappeared, where the unfinished became complete. For a moment, those inner scenes feel almost real. Then reality returns, and the contrast cuts sharply. That is when the tears come, quiet tears, heavy tears, the kind no one sees, the kind that do not ask for attention, the kind that fall because the heart has finally stopped pretending for a few minutes. And if you have made it this far, hear this clearly. Those tears are not weakness. They are what happens when truth reaches the surface after being held down too long. They are the body speaking when the mouth refuses to. They are the private evidence that not everything inside has moved on just because the world outside kept going. What hurts them most is not only what happened, it is what never fully happened. That is the piece that stays alive. They are grieving a possibility, a future that never became real, but felt close enough to touch in their imagination. And the mind can become trapped by possibility in a way it rarely does with facts. Facts end things, possibilities keep them open. So a part of them still thinks about different timing, different choices, different words, different outcomes. If this had shifted, if that had not happened, if one moment had gone another way, if one person had said more, if fear had been smaller, if life had been simpler, those thoughts keep them suspended between what was and what could have been, not fully in the past, not fully present, not fully free. This is why the image of you changes in their mind over time. You stop being only a real person and start becoming a symbol of the unfinished, a symbol of what almost became home, a symbol of what might have changed everything if it had been allowed to fully live. And once that happens, it becomes even harder for them to let go, because now they are not only holding on to you, they are holding on to a story their inner world never stopped writing. The mind always gives extra power to what was interrupted. It adds meaning, it adds weight, it adds longing. That is why some people cannot release what never truly belonged to them in the first place, because what they are holding is not ownership, it is emotional incompletion, and incompletion can be more haunting than loss. Stay with this because this next part matters even more. The pain is not just in the memory, the pain is in the mind's refusal to accept that some deep things never get a clean ending. So they keep functioning, they answer messages, they go to work, they show up at dinner tables and in group chats and in ordinary moments that ask them to be present. On the surface, they seem stable, they seem responsive, they seem fully here, but under that surface, something still feels just slightly off. New bonds do not pull them in the same way. Emotional closeness comes with hesitation now. They may like someone, respect someone, even care about someone, but full surrender feels harder than it used to. Something in them stops just before the deepest point. Something pulls back, not always out of fear of pain alone, but because part of them is still tuned to a frequency that no longer has a place to land. So they move through life feeling as if something is missing, and often they search for that missing thing outside themselves. They think it is about the right person, the right timing, the right chemistry. Sometimes maybe it is, but often what is really missing is closure inside. A piece of emotion was never settled, never named, never released. And until that happens, even good things can feel incomplete. This is why they may seem interested but distant, warm but guarded, available but not fully open. It is not always because they do not care. Sometimes it is because the past is still active in quiet ways they do not fully understand. And the sad part is, they may not even know they are doing it. They just know that something in them no longer drops easily into trust, softness, or depth. Something pauses. Something checks for danger. Something remembers you without saying your name. And that silent remembering shapes more of their present than anyone around them can see. What happened with you reached deeper than ordinary attraction or brief emotion. It touched something central. That is why time alone has not fully erased it. Time can soften edges. Time can create distance. Time can build new routines and new layers of life. But time does not automatically dissolve emotional imprint. When the experience reached below the surface, Some connections pass through the heart and leave. Others go deeper. They enter identity, memory, self-image, expectation, and the hidden map a person carries of what closeness should feel like. Once that map changes, everything after it is measured differently. That is why they still feel your shadow in places where you are not physically present. Not because they want to live in the past, but because the past changed the way the present feels. Even now, there are moments when they stop and feel something drop inside them for no clear reason. It may be a smell, a line in a song, a certain type of quiet, a look from a stranger, a late-night silence that feels too familiar, and suddenly the emotional world opens again. They remember not only you, but the depth, the charge, the sense that something meaningful was happening without needing to be fully explained. That is hard to replace, because it was never just about excitement. It was about aliveness. It was about feeling deeply awake. And once someone has known that kind of emotional awakening, ordinary interactions can feel dim for a long time. That does not mean healing is impossible. It means the imprint was real. It means the heart is still carrying an unfinished language. And yes, that language still speaks, especially when no one else is around to hear it. In their quietest moments, they know the truth, even if they never say it clearly. They know this was not something small. They know the effect stayed longer than they planned. They know that part of them is still standing near a door that never fully closed. They may call it memory. They may call it chemistry. They may call it confusion, timing, attachment, or simple bad luck. But beneath all those labels is the same reality. Something in them still reacts because something in them still remains unresolved. That is why they are not crying for attention. They are crying because the inner conflict is real. One side of them wants to release it, to become clean again, to stop carrying something that belongs to another chapter. The other side still protects the feeling because letting it go would mean accepting that the unfinished will stay unfinished. And that is hard, very hard. Many people would rather stay emotionally suspended than face that kind of final truth. So they hover, they revisit, they imagine, they deny, they remember, they move on and then circle back in thought. It is messy, it is human, it is invisible to almost everyone. And if you are listening closely, you already understand the deepest layer. They are not only mourning what they lost, they are mourning what the connection woke up inside them and then left behind. They are mourning the version of peace, closeness, and emotional truth that almost became permanent, but never did. That is why the tears come quietly. That is why the pain hides itself. That is why their public calm cannot be trusted as the full story. Because some of the strongest heartbreak in the world does not look broken at all. It just looks composed. And still, every day, they try. They try to be normal. They try to be present. They try to speak about the past like it no longer touches them. Sometimes they even believe their own words for a while. They think maybe the feeling is finally fading. Maybe the weight is lighter now. Maybe they are becoming free. Then one small trigger appears and the whole structure trembles again. Not enough for others to see, just enough for them to feel the old fracture underneath. That is when they realize the wound did not disappear. It only became quieter, and quiet pain can last a long time. It can sit beneath smiles, beneath routines, beneath growth, beneath new conversations and better habits and all the visible signs of moving forward. But beneath all that, a private ache can remain, not because they are weak, not because they enjoy suffering, but because some emotional experiences do not leave in a straight line. They leave in layers, they leave in echoes, they leave in slow departures that stop and return before finally fading. And sometimes they do not fully fade at all. Sometimes they simply become part of the person, part of the way they love, part of the way they hesitate, part of the way they remember. So if you ever wondered how someone can seem untouched and still be carrying so much in private, this is how. They hold it together outside. They fall apart where no one can see. They continue smiling while the deeper part of them still sits with what was never completed. And maybe that is the cruelest part of all. Not that they lost you, not even that they still feel you, but that they must carry the weight of an unfinished emotional world while pretending every single day that everything inside them has already let go.